Good morning, brothers and sisters in Christ. Today I want to speak to your hearts about something that touches us all, no matter where we are in life. It's a truth we know in our minds, but often wrestle within our souls, trusting God's plan. Isn't it remarkable how we can proclaim that God is in control on Sunday, but struggle to believe it by Monday? We've all been there, wondering if God sees our struggles, questioning His timing, or even doubting if His promises still hold true in the chaos of our lives. But let me tell you something, friends. God's plan is not just an act of living, it's a living, breathing promise woven into the fabric of our existence. His plan is personal, purposeful, and perfect, even when it doesn't make sense to us. Today, I want to invite you to embark on a journey, not just to understand His plan, but to trust it with all your heart. Even when the road gets hard, even when the answers don't come quickly, and even when life feels overwhelming. This isn't just about what we know. It's about what we believe. It's about leaning on the one who created us, redeemed us, and loves us more deeply than we can imagine. So, as we dive into this message, I encourage you to open your heart, set aside the worries of the week, and allow God's truth to take root in your spirit. Because when we truly trust His plan, it changes everything. Let's walk this path together. And by the end of our time, I believe you'll feel a renewed sense of hope, strength, and faith in the God who holds it all. Stay with me, and let's discover the beauty of trusting God's plan. God's sovereignty is the foundation of our trust in His plan. It means that He holds supreme authority and control over all things in the universe. This truth is not just theological, it is deeply practical, providing comfort and assurance to believers navigating life's complexities. Recognizing God's sovereignty reminds us that nothing happens outside of His knowledge or control. Every event, every moment, whether joyous or painful, is part of a divine tapestry woven by His infinite wisdom and love. When we consider the sovereignty of God, we must understand that His power and authority are not limited by human limitations. He is the creator of all things, the Alpha and the Omega, the beginning and the end. This is not a distant or detached rule, it is personal and intimate. God knows us by name, counts the hairs on our heads, and sees the depths of our hearts. He is involved in every detail of our lives, even when we cannot see His hand at work. Trusting in God's sovereignty means believing that He is working all things together for the good of those who love Him, Romans 8:28. This does not mean life will be free of difficulties. On the contrary, the sovereignty of God often becomes most evident in our trials. When circumstances seem chaotic or overwhelming, we can rest in the assurance that God's control remains unshaken. He sees the bigger picture, the one we cannot comprehend, and orchestrates events for purposes beyond our understanding. The story of Joseph in the Bible is a profound illustration of God's sovereignty. Sold into slavery by his brothers, falsely accused, and thrown into prison, Joseph's life seemed to spiral into despair. Yet through it all, God was at work. His sovereign plan elevated Joseph to a position of authority in Egypt, enabling him to save countless lives during a famine, including the very brothers who betrayed him. Joseph's declaration to his brothers, "You intended to harm me, but God intended it for good," Genesis 50:20, captures the essence of trusting in God's sovereign plan. Another vital aspect of God's sovereignty is His unchanging nature. Unlike human leaders who falter or shift in their decisions, God's will is steadfast. His promises endure and His purposes remain unwavering. This consistency is a source of hope for believers. When the world feels unstable, God's sovereignty anchors our faith. Understanding and trusting God's sovereignty also requires humility. It is an acknowledgement that His thoughts are higher than our thoughts and His ways are higher than our ways. Isaiah 55:9. It means surrendering the desire to control outcomes or dictate the path of our lives, trusting instead that God's plan is infinitely better than anything we could devise. This surrender is not passive resignation, but an active choice to rely on His wisdom and goodness. To trust in God's sovereignty is to live with confidence that He holds our past, present, and future securely in His hands. It is the assurance that no matter what we face, He is faithful, powerful, and always in control. The Bible is rich with examples of individuals who trusted God's plan, often in the face of seemingly impossible circumstances. These stories serve as powerful reminders of the faithfulness of God and the blessings that come from placing complete trust in Him, even when His plan is not immediately clear. By looking at these biblical examples, we can see how trust in God's plan unfolds through obedience, perseverance, and unwavering faith. One of the most striking examples is Joseph. As a young man, Joseph had dreams that seemed to promise a bright and exalted future. However, his life took a dramatic turn when his brothers, out of jealousy, sold him into slavery. Joseph found himself in Egypt, far from his home and family, stripped of everything he knew. Despite the injustice, Joseph remained faithful to God. His journey wasn't without further trials. False accusations landed him in prison, but through it all, Joseph trusted God. Years later, he rose to a position of great authority, overseeing Egypt's resources during a famine. God used Joseph not only to save countless lives, but also to reconcile his broken family. Joseph's story reminds us that even in the darkest moments, God's plan is at work, weaving trials into triumphs for His purposes. Another profound example is Job, a man of great wealth and integrity. Job's life was upended when he lost his children, possessions, and health in a series of devastating events. Despite immense suffering, Job trusted in God's plan even when he couldn't understand it. His faith was tested as friends questioned his integrity and urged him to blame God. Yet Job refused to waver. Instead, he declared, "Though He slay me, yet will I hope in Him." Job 13:15. Job's unwavering trust ultimately led to restoration and blessing, but his story also emphasizes that trust in God's plan doesn't always come with immediate answers. It's a call to faith in God's character, even when His ways are beyond comprehension. Mary, the mother of Jesus, provides another beautiful example of trust in God's plan. When the angel Gabriel appeared to her, announcing that she would conceive and bear the Son of God, Mary faced the uncertainty of how this divine plan would unfold. As a young, unmarried woman, she risked rejection, shame, and even danger. Yet her response was one of complete surrender. "I am the Lord's servant. May your word to me be fulfilled." Luke 1:38. Mary's trust in God's plan was not passive. It required courage and faith to embrace her role in God's redemptive story. Through her obedience, she became the vessel through which salvation entered the world. Abraham's journey of trust is another cornerstone of faith. Called by God to leave his homeland and go to a place he had never seen, Abraham obeyed without knowing the full details of God's plan. His trust was further tested when God asked him to sacrifice Isaac, the son of promise. This command seemed to contradict God's earlier promise to make Abraham the father of many nations. Yet, Abraham's faith in God's plan remained steadfast. At the critical moment, God provided a ram in place of Isaac in faithfulness and affirming that trust in Him is never misplaced. Esther's story also illustrates trust in God's plan amidst uncertainty. As a Jewish queen in a foreign land, Esther faced the challenge of intervening to save her people from annihilation. Though approaching the king uninvited could cost her life, Esther chose to trust God's purpose for her, famously declaring, "If I perish, I perish." Esther 4:16. Her courage and trust in God's timing led to the deliverance of her people and revealed how God's hand works through unlikely circumstances and individuals. These examples show that trusting God's plan often requires faith in the face of uncertainty, obedience when the path is unclear, and perseverance through trials. Each story reminds us that God is faithful, His purposes are good, and His plan, though sometimes hidden, is always perfect. Faith in uncertainty is a hallmark of the Christian journey, requiring us to trust in God when the way forward is unclear or fraught with challenges. Life is filled with situations that test our faith, moments where we don't understand what God is doing, or why he allows certain things to happen. Yet it is in these very moments that faith takes root and grows. Trusting God during uncertainty is not about having all the answers. It is about relying on his character, promises, and presence even when the circumstances make no sense. One of the greatest challenges of faith is relinquishing control. As humans, we are naturally inclined to seek security in what we can see, plan, and predict. Uncertainty disrupts this illusion of control, leaving us vulnerable to fear and doubt. In these moments, faith calls us to shift our focus from our limitations to God's limitless power and wisdom. Scripture reassures us that while we may not know what the future holds, we can trust the one who holds the future. Proverbs 3:5-6 encourages us to trust in the Lord with all your heart and lean not on your own understanding. In all your ways submit to him, and he will make your paths straight. This is a call to let go of our reliance on human reasoning and place our confidence in God's guidance. Uncertainty often reveals the depth of our trust in God. When circumstances are favorable, it is easy to proclaim faith in his plan. However, it is in the valleys of life, when answers are delayed and outcomes are unknown, that genuine faith is tested and refined. This is not a passive process, but an active decision to cling to God's promises even when doubts arise. The Psalms, filled with honest cries of uncertainty and fear, show us that faith does not deny our struggles, but brings them to God, trusting him to provide peace and clarity in his time. The New Testament provides another compelling example in Peter's experience of walking on water. When Jesus called him to step out of the boat during a storm, Peter obeyed, demonstrating remarkable faith. However, as he noticed the wind and waves, fear took over and he began to sink. Jesus immediately reached out to save him, saying, "You of little faith, why did you doubt?" Matthew 14:1. This story illustrates how uncertainty can challenge our faith, but also reminds us that Jesus is always near, ready to lift us when our trust falters. Faith in uncertainty also requires patience. God's timing often does not align with our own. Waiting can be one of the most challenging aspects of trusting his plan. Abraham and Sarah experienced this firsthand as they waited for the fulfillment of God's promise to give them a child. Despite their initial doubts and attempts to take matters into their own hands, God remained faithful to his word, and Isaac was born in his perfect timing. This story reminds us that while uncertainty may test our patience, God's promises never fail. The ultimate example of faith in uncertainty is Jesus himself. In the Garden of Gethsemane, facing the anguish of the cross, Jesus prayed, "My Father, if it is possible, may this cup be taken from me. Yet not as I will, but as you will," Matthew 26:39. His submission to God's plan, even in the face of unimaginable suffering, is the ultimate act of faith. Jesus trusted that God's purpose would prevail, bringing redemption and hope to the world. Faith in uncertainty requires surrender, patience, and trust in God's sovereignty. It is a journey of drawing closer to him, learning to rely on his guidance, and believing that he is working for our good, even when the path is unclear. In the midst of uncertainty, we discover that our faith is not in our circumstances, but in the unchanging, faithful nature of God. Trusting God's plan often involves embracing the process of growth and refinement that comes through trials and challenges. Life is filled with seasons of hardship, where difficulties and uncertainties test our faith and endurance. While these moments are uncomfortable and sometimes overwhelming, they are not without purpose. In fact, God uses these experiences to shape our character, deepen our faith, and draw us closer to him. Trials are not a sign of God's absence, but a testament to his commitment to our transformation and spiritual growth. The Bible speaks frequently about the role of trials in the life of a believer. James 1:2-4 urges us to consider it pure joy whenever you face trials of many kinds, because you know that the testing of your faith produces perseverance. Let perseverance finish its work, so that you may be mature and complete, not lacking anything. This passage highlights that trials are not random occurrences, but are intentionally allowed by God to refine us. They are tools in his hands designed to develop qualities like patience, perseverance, and trust, which are essential for spiritual maturity. When we face challenges, our natural reaction is often to question or resist them. We may wonder why God allows pain or why His plan seems to include suffering. However, trusting God's plan means recognizing that He sees the bigger picture and knows what is ultimately best for us. Just as a potter shapes clay through pressure and heat, God molds us through trials, removing impurities and strengthening our faith. Romans 5:3-5 echoes this idea, stating that suffering produces perseverance, perseverance, character, and character, hope. This process of refinement may be difficult, but it leads to a deeper trust in God's promises and a hope that cannot be shaken. Biblical examples offer powerful insights into how trials can lead to growth. Consider the life of David, who endured years of hardship before becoming king. Anointed as a young shepherd, David spent much of his early life fleeing from King Saul, who sought to kill him. During this time, David faced immense challenges, yet he consistently turned to God in prayer and worship. These trials prepared him to become a leader after God's own heart, teaching him reliance on God and shaping his character. The Psalms David wrote during these years are filled with honest cries for help, yet they also reveal a deep trust in God's faithfulness, even in the face of uncertainty and danger. The Apostle Paul's life is another testament to how trials can lead to spiritual growth. Paul endured shipwrecks, beatings, imprisonment, and persecution, yet he remained steadfast in his mission to spread the gospel. In 2 Corinthians 12:9-10, Paul speaks of a thorn in the flesh that he asked God to remove. God's response was, "My grace is sufficient for you, for my power is made perfect in weakness." Paul came to understand that his trials were opportunities to rely on God's strength rather than his own, allowing God's power to work through him. His faith and resilience were strengthened, enabling him to fulfill his calling despite immense obstacles. Trials also teach us to depend on God rather than on ourselves or worldly solutions. When everything is going well, it is easy to rely on our own abilities or resources. However, challenges strip away our illusions of self-sufficiency and force us to lean on God's wisdom and provision. This dependency is not a sign of weakness, but a recognition of God's sovereignty and care. Psalm 46:1 reminds us that God is our refuge and strength, an ever-present help in trouble. Through trials, we learn to find comfort and strength in His presence, deepening our relationship with Him. Challenges often reveal the depth of our faith and the areas where we need to grow. They expose our fears, doubts, and weaknesses, allowing us to surrender them to God. As we trust Him, in the midst of difficulties, our faith is strengthened, and we begin to see His hand at work in ways we might not have noticed otherwise. Trials are not wasted. They are opportunities for God to display His power and for us to experience His faithfulness on a deeper level. Over time, we come to understand that the refining process, though painful, is an expression of God's love and His desire for us to become more like Christ. Embracing God's timing is one of the most challenging yet crucial aspects of trusting His plan. In a world where instant gratification is the norm, waiting on God can feel counterintuitive and even frustrating. However, God operates outside the bounds of human time, and His timing is always perfect, even when it doesn't align with our own desires or expectations. Trusting His timing requires patience, faith, and the understanding that His delays are not denials but opportunities for His greater purposes to unfold. The Bible is rich with stories that illustrate the importance of waiting on God's timing. Abraham and Sarah's journey in waiting for the promised son Isaac is a profound example. God promised Abraham that he would be the father of many nations, yet years passed without a child. In their impatience, Abraham and Sarah attempted to fulfill the promise in their own way, leading to complications and heartache. Despite their misstep, God remained faithful to His promise, and Isaac was born in His perfect time. This story teaches us that human attempts to rush God's plan often result in unnecessary difficulties, but God's faithfulness prevails even when we struggle to wait. Waiting on God's timing refines our character and strengthens our faith. In the periods of waiting, we are invited to draw closer to Him, seeking His guidance and resting in His presence. These seasons often reveal our dependence on our own timelines and challenge us to surrender control. Through this surrender, we grow in trust and learn to rely on God's wisdom rather than our limited understanding. Isaiah 40:31 reminds us that those who wait on the Lord will renew their strength. They will soar on wings like eagles. They will run and not grow weary. They will walk and not be faint. Waiting is not passive. It is an active process of seeking God, trusting His promises, and finding strength in His presence. God's timing often serves a larger purpose than we can see. In the story of Joseph, we witness a life marked by delays and hardships, yet perfectly aligned with God's plan. Sold into slavery by his brothers, falsely accused and imprisoned, Joseph endured years of waiting before seeing the fulfillment of God's purpose for his life. When he was finally elevated to a position of power in Egypt, Joseph recognized that everything he had endured was part of God's greater plan to save many lives during a famine. His words in Genesis 50:20, "You intended to harm me, but God intended it for good," highlight the sovereignty of God's timing and the importance of trusting Him even in the face of adversity. Embracing God's timing also reminds us that He is working behind the scenes, even when we don't see immediate results. Often we equate waiting with inactivity, but God is always at work orchestrating events and preparing us for what lies ahead. This unseen preparation is critical, as God's delays often position us to receive His blessings at the right time. Esther's rise to queenship in the Persian Empire is an example of how God's timing places us exactly where we need to be for His purposes. Though the events leading up to her moment of influence may have seemed random or delayed, they culminated in her being in the perfect position to save her people. Patience in waiting also demonstrates our faith in God's goodness and trustworthiness. When we wait for His timing, we declare our belief that His ways are higher than our ways and that He is working all things together for our good. Romans 8:28 assures us of this truth, encouraging us to trust that God's plan is for our ultimate benefit, even when we cannot see the full picture. Waiting refines our ability to trust, teaching us to find peace in God's promises rather than in immediate outcomes. Embracing God's timing requires humility and surrender. It is a recognition that we are not in control, but we serve a God who is sovereign, loving, and infinitely wise. His timing is not bound by our impatience, and His delays are not arbitrary. They are deliberate acts of preparation, alignment, and purpose. Trusting His timing is an act of faith that allows us to experience His blessings in their fullness, reminding us that His ways, though often mysterious, are always perfect. In conclusion, trusting God's plan is a journey of faith that calls us to surrender our fears, lean into His promises, embrace His refining process, and rest in His perfect timing. It's not always easy, but it is always worth it. God's plan is not just about the destination, it's about the transformation we experience along the way. When we align our hearts with His will, we find peace that surpasses understanding and a purpose far greater than anything we could imagine for ourselves. As we navigate life's uncertainties, let us remember that God is faithful, His love is steadfast, and His plan for us is always good. Thank you for taking the time to reflect on these truths today. As you move forward, may you walk with confidence in God's plan, find strength in His promises, and experience the joy of His presence in every season of your life. Good luck on your journey of faith, and may God bless you abundantly.